Well, we have made it. We are on the verge of the kickoff of the Major League Soccer season, but we've got one more team left to talk about, and it is potentially a big one. A lot of big names going out the door, potentially some big superstars, future stars coming in the door, and we're going to do it all with the head of the Bayoucitian, Jesus Acevedo Jr. Jesus, did I just nail the name?
You did nail the name. I shook my head. I was like, yes, thank you. Thank you, David.
I was nervous. I was working on it. I was ready for it. Jesus, we've done stuff for a long time together. You have been the best covering this Houston Dynamo team. It has been an eventful team over the last few years. Of course, the Western Conference Finals run, some big star players. It has been a little bit of a different offseason, though, going into it. What's your feeling right now as we look towards the kickoff of the season?
My feeling is, similar to what I've been seeing online from fans and what I've seen is that they didn't expect so much change this offseason that has happened. Ache going now, Coco going now, Mikael going now. So all those changes, Steve Clark going now. So all those changes, it's definitely, I don't want to say they're kind of like restocking or retooling because this team still has ambitions to continue on the path that it's been for the past two seasons. Like, like you said, Western Conference Finals, U.S. Open Cup champion, beating Miami and Miami.
Yeah.
For Lauderdale, I guess, but
I don't care.
So the assessment is that it's a team that I think has skewed now a little bit younger with Achache going out and, Steve Clark going out. But it's also, there's a lot of questions about who's going to be carrying this team. Arthur is still there, so he's still going to hold that defensive midfield position, kind of now lead that defensive midfield line. But now where is the attack going to come from? Ezequiel Ponce is coming back. He had a full offseason. He joined the team mid-season. So now, he has a full offseason now with the team. So now this is a guy that they've paid the most ever for. So now he needs to play like it. He needs to score goals. So the assessment is one that there's a lot of change and a lot more questions than answers. They signed Nico Lodero, which they've been trying to get a Nico Lodero type forever, and they just ended up getting Nico Lodero. So go figure, And I know people have saying he could be like a Darwin Quintero, but I kind of see possibly being more of a Vicente Sanchez type. Vicente Sanchez played with Wilmer Cabrera 2018. Possibly go get more playing time than Vicente Sanchez did, but that's still the question is, who is going to play that DP10 role down because Nico Lodero is not your long-term answer. And I think I was reading that there's a clause in his contract that if Nacional comes and asks for him,
interesting,
he can go.
Right.
The Dynamo have
so
to.
If he can go home, then he gets the opt-out to go home. Yeah.
So the assessment is one that there's a lot more questions than answers. But one thing I'll tell you, what I've noticed in the past season with Ben Olsen's teams, we're here with the Dynamo, they always start slow. And by slow, I don't mean they're always losing games. There's a lot of draws there, a lot of like tough 1-0 losses. But around the summers, when they start kind of picking it up, they kind of start turning the knob. And I don't know if that's because of the way that the system they play, they need those months to kind of like start connecting passes. And now especially maybe even more with so many new players added in. So my assessment is a lot of changes, but still a lot of questions. And I think the Dynamo team is going to kind of be borderline draws, 1-0 losses until they kind of get more into the system and try to build that synergy with this new team.
It's fascinating. They start the year with Copa Tejas coming up tomorrow against Dallas, which is really interesting way to start the year. We have our Doylism coming up. We've got our line from Andrew Wiebe, but you ran through a lot of it there. But let's start with our transfer and our offseason. And it starts with Ache. Came in as the biggest signing in the club's history, the biggest name in the club's history as former captain of El Tri in Champions League, and actually ended up starting a lot for Atletico Madrid his final half year after he'd already signed with Houston and the years he played with Porto. Before we get into the rest of it, now that it's over and we look back a little bit, and I think time will change things, what's his legacy? What did his signing mean for the club and how it ended up working out?
It's pretty interesting you say legacy because he was here, 2.5 years? Yeah. So it's like, what kind of legacy can you establish, But I think in those 2.5 years, I think that first half season was really tough on him. Really tough on him. He was coming back, I guess, still dealing with injuries and trying to get, build up to the MLS style of game. The second season, his first full season, we saw what he did when he plays. He led the team to the Western Conference Finals, U.S. Open Cup champion. He really stabilized the team, and everything played through Ache. So I think his legacy is one that maybe kind of put Houston back on the map, perhaps, to more of the bigger MLS audience for sure. I mean, just on the name alone, Ache. So there were definitely more eyes on the Houston Dynamo. And when the Rice won the Houston Dynamo, they delivered.
Yeah.
Like I said, started slow both his last 2 seasons, but I think his legacy is one of maybe putting this team back on the map. Now, how he left may leave a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths, when he spit, in the red car. So that was his last game. And to be honest, I don't think he really wanted to leave the Dynamo. I think he wanted to stay here with Houston. And this is just, I haven't talked to him since then, but I think just, this is my opinion based on some of his posts that I saw. Or, I felt like he wanted to come back, but I think the Dynamo saw the writing on the wall. He's 1 year older. His second full season, he missed a lot more games than his first full season. So that definitely aided the Dynamo's up and down season. I mean, when he was playing, the Dynamo were a good team. They were possessed. I know Matt Doyle, the Dynamo were one of his favorite teams because of their playing style, and he was always trying to tell people, hey, watch the Dynamo. They have a great playing style. And, so, but his legacy is one I would say is put the Dynamo back on the map. But the way he left, I think left a sour taste in people's mouth. And I would like to see, going to how you first frame it, I want to see how a couple years from now, how we look back on these 1.5 years of Ache.
Yeah, a lot of times for players like that, they leave, and sometimes then the negative end goes away, or depending on how connected they choose to stay to the market and the club, sometimes then they sort of come back into vogue as a fan favorite and all those things. And so I think that will be interesting for me going forward, is like, does Ache come back to Houston? Does he talk about the Houston Dynamo as he's gone? And does that excite fans? Him wanting to stay makes sense. He's making $5.5 million to live in a pretty nice city and enjoy his life. You could understand from the end production why Houston maybe blinked twice at that number. And my guess would be he wanted to stay in certain terms and not no matter what. And we've seen that now with a few of these players where it's like, well, we're going to bring them in for the now. And then when the now ends, you have to sort of make that hard decision of like, is this the player to stay? It happened to Nico Ladero in Seattle. He has now stayed in Major League Soccer, but not at the same production level of what we saw, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So Ache leaves, let go at the end of the season, his contract not extended. And then there have been some other big output players for this club, but it's been on sales. Coco Carrasquilla, who has been the maestro number 2 to Ache at times, or number 1, however you look at it over the last few years, he's been sold. And then Mikael just recently sold back to his native Brazil, brought in as a Houston 2 player, now sold, we think, for multi-million dollars to Palmeiras. A massive success off the field in terms of, conversation and all of that. But these are 2 huge losses. What do you make of the club's decision that now was the right time to sell, and whether it's helping these players do this, their dreams, or the club making a financial decision about these losses?
I definitely have to give Pat credit. I mean, there's a lot that you can blame on him, but you have to give him credit for making that tough decision, especially with Ache. I mean, most of the GM, not most, but maybe a Pat Dynamo GM re-signs him for that 5.5 just on name alone. But I think Pat looked at it and he's like, okay, how many games did he play? What was the production value? When he's on, obviously he's good, but we need, can we take that gamble, or can we turn that 5.5 million into something else, which is what they have done. Now, Coco, I, like most others, expected that maybe he was going to have one more year with the Dynamo, and now he was going to take the reins from Ache and kind of be now, like I said, that number 1 option in midfield. That they sold him, I know Coco always had aspirations to go to Europe. The offers weren't there that satisfied the Houston Dynamo front office, and then Pumas comes along, and I mean, he wanted to go and challenge himself at a higher level, and at this point, Liga MX is still a bit of a higher level than MLS. Mikael is one that I wouldn't say it's a surprise, because Pat Onstad kind of he was dropping breadcrumbs in some interviews saying that they had got offers, they had not offers, but they had been in talks with Mikael. And it's definitely one, I would say, the best offseason from the front office standpoint about selling players, especially Mikael. I think this is maybe the first or second, I'm trying to remember, player that they've sold that started from Dynamo 2. That's Houston has not had a good history of building up youth players from Dynamo 2, then going to Dynamo, then signing them, which is what other MLS teams have done really well. And this is the first season I've seen the Dynamo actually do that. And I think it's a signal that, hey, now the Dynamo are a team where you can go, you can build up your game, and they will take care of you. They will say you to a team. Yeah. So I would say from the front office standpoint, I think it was a good offseason. Granted, they didn't get the players back that they wanted, like a DP style 10, or a Nico Lodero type, as I was joking about earlier. But, I think there were more, I don't want to say wins, because obviously it's a whole retool roster. But from a front office standpoint about how this sets them up better for the future, I think it was a win that way. But I think obviously it was a loss because they didn't get more players, impact players that they wanted.
Yeah, it's the tough job for a CSO of managing the now and the future. We had this conversation around the LA Galaxy. Now the Galaxy are pinched in a different way because they had so much on-field success that everyone starts hitting bonuses and there's not really space. But I think for Houston, similar of like this was a 2-3 year span in Ache's first contract of like, can we contend? And they did. And then you look at it at the end and you say, well, if Hector's leaving, are we still at the same level? And if we're not, is now a time for us to cash in, get this money so that we can use this money for the future. And as you said, create this name for other players to say, we can be a jumping off point for you and help you in recruiting that next generation of players and hopefully recruit players maybe at a higher level than what Houston's been able to get over the last 10 plus years. And so the only issue in the middle of that is they hadn't really gotten those players as of right now. Right. They've gotten some. The other big loss to mention is Steve Clark, who struggled in the penalty kick shootouts to end the year, but was a top 5 goalkeeper pretty consistently in his time in Houston. And they're replacing him with Andrew Tarbell and Jimmy Maurer, which are serviceable MLS keepers, but it feels like that to me is a big loss as well.
I do think so too. Not just that. I mean, the Dynamo had one of the better defense last year, and Steve Clark was a part of that, organizing the back line, obviously Mikael too. But I think it's a loss that way. I know fans were mad at Steve Clark, upset because he doesn't stop penalties. And look, I get it, and I mean, we said it earlier before we hit record. If you get it to penalties, you're either already half lost or half won, depending where
it's not his fault.
Yeah, it's not his fault. But I mean, when he was called upon to stop shots, he did that. And so that's one thing where I'm looking at is the defense. I know Ben loves defense, so that's one thing I'm looking at in the first couple of months is how does this defense work? Because I mean, Eric Shevchenko and Mikael, they led that back line so well over the past 2 seasons. Mikael under Eric Shevchenko's tutelage grew a lot more. I mean, that's why he got sold. So Steve Clark, I think it's a loss that I think it's not talked about a lot, but I think it's one that could impact them, especially in this first couple months as they ramp up the defense.
Yeah, and he was obviously a cultural leader for the team. That is a huge loss. I think there's also now a lot more members of this team that have been around now through this 2-3 year span. The Griffin Dorsey's and Daniel Steres's and, Arter and all of that. So your hope is maybe that's blunted a bit there. And I should mention on Mikael, I voted him best 11. As a center back. Like that's how good of a player I think they are losing. It's not just, it's a starting center back. I thought he was the apex as the starting center back for this pairing in replacement for all of these. I mentioned Jimmy Maurer and the 2 big names that you've mentioned, Nico Lodero, and the other one is Jack McGlynn, brought in on what we're calling right now a cash trade transfer inside of Major League Soccer. And Jack McGlynn seems like the model of what they're trying to build, to look at a player like that and say to them, you could be the next Coco. You could be the next Mikael. Come here, build up who you are, and then sell you on. And he's got big potential, but it was, to me, a curveball when I saw him brought in and it be Houston connected.
It definitely was. This is part of what I was saying where now they skew a bit younger. Jack is, 21, 22 years older. Scored a great goal in the January U.S. men's national team camp. So I definitely think he's going to fill that Ache role, more or less. I wonder how much more freedom they'll give him offensively because, as we both know, great offensive player. His defense can kind of he could improve on that. But I think that's where he can benefit from playing with Artur. But I'm interested to see how the midfield shapes up now with Jack kind of leading the line. Because they had Archer, Arthur, and Coco. I mean, you could make the argument the 3 best midfielders or best midfield line in MLS. You can make that argument. So losing 2 of them, it's a big loss. So I think Jack, like you said, I think he can put his stamp on this team and be like, this is my team now, or be among the team leaders. So I think this for Jack is an opportunity to be like, okay, I got traded away for a team that didn't allow me to play as much as I like to play up front. Now this team is going to allow me that. So now he needs to shine through. And I think you said it perfectly. I think he should look at it and be like, well, they just saw a couple players. If I put in a couple good seasons, I could be on my way overseas.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the style fit is so perfect for him. He's coming out of what was probably the worst case scenario for him, and credit to him, he made it work. He got on the field as a young player. He started in MLS Cup, like so many great things in Philadelphia, and I think he'll be a better player for it. Now he's coming to a team that fits all of his skill sets. They've got the hole in the roster, as you said, with Hector leaving for him to fill. So he's going to get high volume of touches in a flow of the game that he wants, from an area of the field he wants, and he's going to get to pick his head up and serve passes and connect the game and all those types of things, which I think is why our over-under line is going to be based around him, because I think there's a lot of excitement from the MLS sickos and nerds about what he could be. Nico Ladero, the other signing, we heard sort of all offseason, we want a pocket 10, we want to go DP, all of that. Is this sort of an acknowledgement that those deals didn't work out and Nico's a bit of a stopgap?
That's essentially what it is. I think they, I didn't hear about what names they were looking at, but I know they were looking for, they've been trying to get number 10 for 6-7 years now, and that just seems to never, they seem to always get the number 10s when they're a bit past their prime, Vicente Sanchez, Darwin Quintero, and now here we have Nico.
AKA
Ladero,
cheaper would be the other term I would use.
Definitely. But yeah, I think he's just going to fill that stopgap. My concern is, like I mentioned earlier, what about in the summer, Nacional does come calling. Yeah. Now you lose your stopgap, and now what happens there? So I wouldn't be surprised if Pat's working the phones trying to get something done by this summer to fill that stopgap, so they don't have to rely on Nico. And I think that's where Jack, depending how he is up to speed on Ben Olsen's game plan for the team, it could make it easier to he can go ahead to Nacional or not have to rely on Nico as much. But I think it's definitely a stopgap. I think Nico, from what we did with Orlando last year, very serviceable still. He still has the moves. Obviously not what he was with the Seattle Sounders, right? But definitely still can be serviceable, and that's all it is, just a stopgap, to be honest.
And again, with style, Orlando plays against the ball a bit more.
Right.
It's easier as an older player to have the ball come to your feet. I think what you're talking about in terms of start of season makes sense, of like, it takes a while to build this style, but when teams come to Houston in the summer and have to chase the ball, they should be struggling, and it is a really good time for Houston to hit their form. Reminder, because it's different for every MLS team. For cup competitions, it's Leagues Cup and U.S. Open Cup for the Houston Dynamo. You talked about that U.S. Open Cup victory back in 2023, which was a huge moment for the club, and the potential to do it once again. And then on the Leagues Cup side, it's a tough one. Tigres to start things out, Mazatlan and Pachuca, but that will come later in the year. My last question for you, and then we'll get into our Doyleism. On Ben Olsen's side, they are the outlier in Major League Soccer. They were almost 60% possession last year, number one by far in MLS. Big changes up the spine, basically the entire spine, Hector, Coco. Do you think it remains the same? Do you think the commitment to the style is still there, even if the success or the exact players aren't there?
That's a good question, and I was hoping to ask Ben some of these questions, which I should say right now, the actual Dynamo are having some press conferences at Shell Stadium. But when David Gaz calls you, you get on a call with David Gaz. So there you go, David. But no, I think knowing Ben and how he's operating, it's gonna be different. Like I said, I think these first couple months, fans and the MLS media needs to kind of have temper as far as what this team could look like, because I think just that changing the spine, I think that's a very good way to put it. The spine of the team has changed, and so I think Ben with this assistant coaches, they have to kind of see, okay, how do we maintain the same play style, but shift it just a bit based on the players that now we have, So I think it's going to be a bit of a struggle, but I think they're going to still, I think that defense is going to hold them down to at least kind of stay borderline to where they don't lose too many games where like, well, this season's done. So I think they just kind of got to weather the storm in these first couple games. I do think it'll be the same where they still have possessions. I know that's something that Ben Olsen has really talked about, that's their style. That's what they play. They don't change too much for teams, maybe a tweak here or tweak there, And Ben's one that he holds all his cards close to his chest, as I'm sure you know. So I'll ask a couple questions different ways, and he'll just look at me like, you just asked that question. But
or he'll just say it because it's Ben Olsen.
Or he'll just say, yeah. But yeah, he's one thing he said is that we don't change that. We are who we are. We'll make small tweaks here, small tweaks there, but nothing that'll be drastic. So I imagine it'll be the same thing this season. Like I said, I'll go back and say I think the first couple months they're gonna figure things out, see what tweaks they need to make sure they still play their game that they played the past 2 seasons that some MLS sickos love.
It's going to be fun to watch. Let's go to the number one MLS sicko, Matt Doyle, and let's hear his thoughts.
I spent the whole offseason really wanting to believe with the Dynamo because their game model the last 18 months proved really resilient, even without Hector Herrera and Coco Carrasquilla, both of whom are obviously gone. But you take away, Steve Clark as well, who I thought was really good last year, and that's a blow. I don't expect them to be as good in goal. They lost, backup left backs. That matters in this league, having someone who could add a little penetration. Their U22 attackers, Inali and Quinones, both recovering from an ACL tears. We don't know how they're going to be. Sebas Ferreira was a bust of a DP. Nonetheless, in the middle of last year, he got hot for about a month, and he got them points. Just coming in off the bench or sometimes starting and putting the ball in the back of the net. They don't have a guy who can do that this year behind Ezequiel Ponce. And to be fair, Ezequiel Ponce wasn't great in his 800-ish minutes or so. Like, he was fine, but he wasn't a high-level match winner. So there's so many question marks. I was going to hang with them, and then the news came that they were going to sell Mikael, the great young Brazilian center back, to Palmeiras, which, a club like Palmeiras comes in with a record transfer fee offer, you kind of have to do it. So it's just too many pieces missing from this team. And even with the additions, Jack McGlynn playing as an 8, Nico Ladero probably, I guess, as the number 10, which would push Amin Bassi over to that Coco role. Even with the additions, it just feels like they took too much of a hit in terms of pure talent, and too many question marks in both boxes and up the spine. And when you have it doesn't matter how resilient your game model has been. When you have that much changeover, there's got to be some regression, especially within the context of so many teams in the Western Conference really investing and looking better on paper this year. I think the glass half full take at this point, anyway, is that it's going to be a 1 step forward or back to take 2 steps forward kind of season for the Dynamo as they sort out the rest of their roster. Hopefully, get McGlynn and Brooklyn Rains and maybe a couple other young players more playing time and bigger roles, and then really hit the ground running in 2026. Not writing them off entirely for 2025, but I don't expect them to be as good this year as they were the last 2.
It's so funny. He said something that I've said to people here is that I feel exactly what I feel like they took 1 step back, but they're going to take 2-3 steps forward. Right. Now, I don't know if that'll be for the whole season, but that's how exactly how I see it. Took that 1 step back to kind of reassess. And now how can this taking this 1 step back is going to take us 2-3 steps forward? That's exactly right.
And that's one of the things for anyone out there who's listening, who doesn't listen to the show. We've got salary cap. And we've got depth charts that we built that you can get if you subscribe to our Patreon. And it basically says most of the contracts on this team end after this season. They're all options next year. So they got a ton of money in Mikael and in Coco. They got the money off the books from Ache, and they are now in a position of, if they want to rechart things going forward. And we still are looking at a roster that Pat Onstad has been juggling from the previous regime because there were so many long-term contracts. So if that's the case, I think there's positives in that if Houston can explain that and push that. But let's talk about the big name that is on the roster, which we hadn't mentioned yet as much, was Ezequiel Ponce. And Doyle talked about it. Sebas Ferreira out the door. The hope is getting healthier on the wings with Anelli and Quinones coming back. What can Ezequiel Ponce be, and what is the feeling that you're hearing sort of out of the club about what last year was and what he's brought?
Last year was, I think, still, and it's almost like an MLS trope to say, oh, he was getting adjusted to the league, right? That's essentially what it was, right? He was getting adjusted to the league, so that's why I'm interested to see how he does in these first, from now, when the season starts up until the summer, how is Ponce doing, because he's had the first full offseason with the club. Yeah. He knows how it is to play in MLS, so I'm interested to see it now with some The service that he's gonna get is what I'll be looking at. I think they'll hit up on something that we hadn't talked about. Enali and Quinones both hurt. Both electric players. Especially Enali in the 2 games we saw, everybody was like, "Whoa, who is this kid?"
Yeah.
So and then he got hurt, and so I think how Ponce does will be based on how much delivery he gets into the box. Where he gets the ball. He's a proven goal scorer in Europe, but can that translate? That's what I'll be looking at, and I think the summer would be a good assessment of what kind of player he can be. Maybe him and Nico will find some kind of linkage together. So, but that's the one question I have is how he's gonna do in these first months leading to the summer. Yes, even if the team doesn't do as well, but if he's kind of like banging in goals and making those runs behind defense, holding up the ball, syncing up plays with other players. But I think I know fans already last year, they were already like, oh, who is this guy? He has scoring, we spent so much money. So I know fans here in Houston, they've been clamoring for number 9 ever since Mauro Manotas left. They were hoping that Sebastian Ferrer would be there, and he was that at different points. Some fans will argue he didn't get the rightful time in that position that he should have gotten, especially last year, when, just like those say, for a month, he got hot. Saved them for a couple of games, saved them some draws. When it comes to Ponce, I think summer is when I'm really going to start being more assessing. Okay, you've had 3-4 months now. What have you done? So yeah.
The roster is interesting, and if in LA and Quinones, and I thought Aliou showed bursts as well, and maybe there's a question. It's maybe he's the backup center forward really, and playing out on the wing wasn't his true role. But if both of them can hit, if you have 2 wingers, maybe you slide Bossy back inside. It changes the runway for Griffin Dorsey on the right wing, which has been, I think, part of the success of having Coco as, a quote-unquote pocket winger that likes to sit inside. But it feels like the talent is a little different now, and it's going to have to be adjusted of the way it all plays out as the season goes along. Let's finish on our over-under line here, and it's Jack McGlynn related because we're the sickos and we're excited about it. And so Andrew Wiebe sets it over-under for goals plus assists, so all goal contributions in MLS regular season play at 16.5. So last year, his best year as a pro with Philadelphia, he had 4 goals, 7 assists to finish at 11. So the question is, as the full-time starter with a lot of this attack running around him, is he going to put in 5 more or 6 more goal contributions? My guess would be we probably land on the assist side more. So does he get to double-digit assists and then probably sort of hold steady with 5 or 6 goals this year? What do you make of this, and where do you fall?
I think I fall just under. I think it's going to be 15, combination of goals and assists. And I think I wonder, maybe, going back to what I was saying, maybe it's a kind of a slow start for him, but then once some of these injured players, especially Enali, Quinones, start coming back, that'll open more avenues for him to find people behind the line. But I also think, I think you brought up a good name, Ali, which I actually forgot about him. I think what he brings on the wing could also open things up for Jack McGlynn. The only thing is that, as many fans know, Aliou is not the best at sometimes shooting the ball when he's in the right position. So, Jack will be like, I gave you the ball right there, shoot. So it could be. So I think that's why I think 15 is a good number. I mean, 16 plus over that, I think will be great. I'll be, some team could come over during the season and sign him if he goes more than 16 and a half. So, but my number is 15.
Yeah, I mean, he would be bordering on or probably end up on most assists for an American player if he ends up there. Although I think Jesus could put up some big numbers this year as well. Brian Gutierrez, Diego Luna. So there are some options. But I'm going to go over on this line. I think if you look at 7 assists last year with Philadelphia, and just the game's going to run through his feet even more. And what we saw in that U.S. national team game, which I'm just intrigued by, was his role in that was what it will be with Houston, is he came and got the ball from the center backs. And so he was able to consistently be the one setting the tone, setting the play, and he can either hit those through balls and long balls from deep or slowly progress the game up. And then he's in the final third, also creating chances. Or if you leave him open, turns out he can shoot, which is what we found out as well, especially on his left foot, maybe not so much on his right foot. So I have the belief that he ups all those numbers just in terms of sheer quantity of time and opportunity. And I think and the system as well. fitting him and having him sort of pace through the games and get comfortable and find the gaps and start to probe a little bit and try and pull defenders out with his eyes and his hips and then start to break things. So I'm going to go over on this one and say I think he'll have double-digit assists. And my guess is the goals, 4 goals last year, that at a minimum, he equals that, if not gets a little bit better. And he's able to hit over that line. And I think if that's the case, right, if he hits, if Ponce has a pretty good year, if they're able to settle the spine well enough out, losing Mikael and Steve Clark, I think it's a team that could push for the playoffs. And I do think it's a team that you could confidently say at the end of the year is prepared for that step forward the following year. And if that's the goal, I think it's unfortunate for fans from 2 years ago saying we're right on the verge of the Western Conference Finals to take the steps back. But I think Pat Onstead will probably tell us, and maybe he'll do so at some point this year at the end, like the club will be better off going forward for all of that.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think, if like I say, if he hits more than 16.5, if he gets to 18, 19, 20, I think Dynamo will definitely get some calls about him potentially. I'm not saying that they will send him, right? Because I know Dynamo will wait for the right offer, but I think that would definitely put him up there. Maybe a best 11 candidate, with those kind of numbers. And I think the play style, going to what you've been saying all episode long, I think that more than anything is just going to help him, get the ball on his feet more. So yeah, I think that's a number. I'm still gonna stay with 15 just to be more conservative, but I think even that
be realistic. I think with the
yeah, maybe I'm being a little bit more realistic. I wouldn't be surprised if most of his numbers come staggering, and then after the summer they just kind of start picking up as the team will hopefully pick up their play. So or look, we could both be wrong, and the Dynamo come out just shooting fire, and they blaze through the whole league.
Listen, season kicks off in a couple of moments, so everyone will know that maybe when they listen to this over us. They start with FC Dallas, Copa Tejas out the gate. It is a fascinating situation across Texas. Eric Quill taking over in Dallas, and then Nico Estevez moving from Dallas to Austin. Austin spent a little over, $25 million on their front line. Dallas brings in Lucho Acosta, and Houston had been the favorites over the two of them the last 2 years. Now that might be in question. I think all of that makes all the teams better, having more intrigue, having more interest.
Yes.
I think it's going to be a fun year in Texas, and I'm looking forward to it. If you want to follow it, Bayoucitian is the place to do it. Jesus Acevedo Jr., thanks for taking the time, and let's do this again.
For sure, David. Thank you so much. And good luck to you guys and Soccer Sectors.